Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey everybody, this is the Digital Asset Investor, and I just listened to the entire Anthony Pompliano video, or not video, but the podcast interview with Brad Garlinghouse. And let me tell you what, my summary of what I got out of it kind of shocked me. About what I got out of it about Anthony Pompliano, it kind of shocked me, and I will tell you what I think at the end of this. At the end of this video, I actually took notes and summarized the whole thing. I thought it was a great interview. I thought Anthony Pompliano was very respectful of Brad Garlinghouse, and I think Anthony Pompliano is a very nice guy, and I think he's a smart guy. But I'm not going to say yet what I truly got out of this interview, and it hit me at the very end. One of the last lines, it hit me because the guy literally, you could tell it was kind of like his eyes were just glassed over and was just completely not going to see what was right in front of his face. That is what I got out of that interview, and I'll tell you why in a second. But first, there's just so much to go through. Brad Garlinghouse, he popped up this afternoon we knew he was coming on Fox Business, and I'm not going to cover that in this video. I've got too much to cover, but I'll do that in the first video tomorrow morning once I've digested what he said there. I haven't even seen it yet. Okay, here we go. From Jonathan D, at XRP_YD7. Leonidas, I'm gonna kind of go through a lot of these things fast so that I could really go over what the Pompliano interview was about. But Leonidas had tweeted this out. Banco Santander Executive Chairwoman Anna Boaton at the Economic Club of New York. We have a great partnership with Ripple. We've done 100,000 transactions with OnePay FX. It is very popular. We'll launch PayGo FX in a few months. So I'm not going to go into pull all these up and go into these things any further. You can go to his feed and watch it. Brad Garlinghouse tweeted out about this is the other interview that I showed you earlier. As the industry continues to mature, I hope to have more conversations like this one with, these are a couple of people at Fortune magazine. Let's cut through the hype around white papers and price swings and focus more on how to solve real problems at scale. Okay, and then a lot of stuff came out from the Economic Club in New York. Such an incredible conversation between Fox Business, Liz Clayman, and Ripple's Brad Garlinghouse. She's the one also that did the Fox Business interview, I believe. A great primer on cryptocurrency and where the industry is going. If you missed it, you can replay the live stream here. Now, I'm eating a beef jerky as I'm talking to you about this. I went to get a cup of coffee, and I was out of coffee this afternoon, and so I decided I'd have a beef jerky instead. How I came to that conclusion, I don't know, but I do like beef jerky. Okay, moving along. The Economic Club tweeted this out as well. Citing his work with MoneyGram, Brad Garlinghouse, it is a really big deal and is demonstrating the value for shareholders. Well, look at the shareholders' stock price and you'll see that. It's done quite well since that deal was announced. Then the crypto circus. Brad Garlinghouse, Ripple CEO at the Economic Club of New York, October 8, 2019. This is the best line that came out of it, in my opinion. Banks don't like Swift. That's a great place to be. And this is, if you haven't seen this yet, this is, you can go and watch the entire interview at the Economic Club. It was a very well done thing. I said on Twitter, and I'll say it to you, the way this interview went down, it was almost like they were presenting Ripple, Brad Garlinghouse, and XRP the way that you would present a debutante. It was like, I said it was like when they do the road shows for IPOs, where they go around the country and they present this stock to investors. I felt like Ripple and XRP was being presented to the Economic Club of New York, all the fancy people. But go to Make XRP. You can go and give him a subscribe and watch this full video. Okay. And then there's this. I just wanted to show you this for adoption purposes. It's a FUD article, but he says articles about crypto are now frequently popping up in the Wall Street Journal. Even though this article from today is sprinkling a little FUD about the slow start with BACT and BTC futures, it just shows that digital assets are becoming mainstream hodl. And then we had this from XRP Crypto Wolf. This is the VP for the Euro. I'm not going to try to say his name. Social Dialogue and Financial Services at the EU Commission plans to bring new regulations for cryptocurrency, including Facebook's Libra. Europe needs a common approach on crypto assets. I intend to propose new legislations. So, once again, Europe and all these other countries seem to really be leading the charge while the United States sits on its hands. Jonathan D at XRP_YD7 is active today. Sent me this. There's two pieces of economic news that should scare you, terrify you. This is Bloomberg. UN Security General Antonio Guterres warns that the global body is facing its worst cash crisis in about a decade. Say financial crisis that decade. And then the official neighbor of the digital asset investor channel, Maroon XRP, Mississippi State, sent me this. New IMF chief Georgieva warns of synchronized slowdown in the global economy is experiencing a synchronized slowdown. The new head of International Monetary Fund said, what is a synchronized slowdown? That sounds like a bunch of bodies are intentionally slowing it down. That's kind of creepy. And then Alex Cobb, every once in a while, I'll message with Alex, and he had sent me a message, and he sent this, so I was going to give him credit. At Alex Cobb _ for those of you that don't know, everybody knows Alex Cobb. You ought to give him a follow here, and he's got a great live stream. He was one of the first guys to live stream. He's one of those definite subscribes in the XRP community. But he sent me this, which I thought was funny. John McAfee in this thread says, no, none. I am not invested in XRP. That kind of surprised me, and I think it may have surprised Alex Cobb as well. Okay, now here we are. The guy that initially gave me told me about the interview with Brad Garlinghouse, Coining203 at Coining203. He's got a blog now, a coil blog now. You need to follow his blog as well. And he said that this came from this person too, IDIAZIC. So give them a follow. And now we will get to the Anthony Pompliano interview. Okay, let me take another bite of this beef jerky first. All right, I took notes here, folks. And the first thing somebody asked me, I'll tell you who it was. Mr. B asked me my thoughts. And I'm going to read to you what I told Mr. B. This was my summation of the Brad Garlinghouse interview. I thought that Anthony Pompliano was respectful to Brad Garlinghouse. But what I got out of it that I really didn't think that I would see from Anthony Pompliano. I think that Anthony Pompliano listened intently, and I think he asked a lot of questions. But at the very end of that interview, and I'll get to that point too, I believe that in the end, my deduction from him was that Anthony Pompliano listened to it and all that, but his eyes were completely glazed over. I think that he completely ignores all facts and logic related to anything except Bitcoin. That is what I got out of this interview. I think that he is the prototype that is blinded by the Bitcoin ideology. And it really surprised me, but it didn't really hit me till the last line or two. But again, I think he's a good guy. I think he was respectful. I think he's a nice guy. I think it was a great interview. Okay. I've got bullet points here. I was going to go over for those of you that haven't heard it. Here's some of the things that were talked about. The first thing I got out of it, Brad Garlinghouse said he invested in Bitcoin in 2012. As I recall, Bitcoin prices would have been in the double digits maybe by then, maybe the teens or something. I don't remember exactly. The other interesting thing in this interview, he said that after he I don't know if he quit his job before Ripple, he just to see what it was all about, he became an Uber driver for about a month. And he said that when he was called by the recruiter for Ripple, he said it was a recruiter that he knew. He said when he was called by the recruiter, he actually hit the ignore button once or twice when the recruiter who he kind of knew was calling, because he had a passenger in the car as an Uber driver. I thought that was pretty crazy. Let me see what else here. He also said he was driving a Tesla as an Uber driver, and he said people would get in the car and be like, wow. Okay. More beef jerky, sorry. He did mention what, I can't remember which guy at Ripple had said it. Remember the guy that said they were trying to put a dent in the universe? That was their goal. He did mention that at the beginning and at the end of the interview, and he said that's a Steve Jobism. Then Pompliano brought up Xcurrent, Xrapid, Xvia, and wanted Brad to talk about that. Brad mentioned that is now called Xrapid. He mentioned on-demand liquidity like 2 or 3 times, and I think he said something to the effect of that's what they were changing the name to. Then he set out, and then there was a couple of instances in this interview where Brad said things where it was kind of, he wasn't trying to challenge Anthony Pompliano, but in order to tell the truth, it sounded almost like a challenge. At one point, he said that the people that created XRP, they set out to build a better Bitcoin. And that was when he was explaining the creation of XRP. He also said this kind of was a challenge too. And in both cases, Anthony Pompliano did not try to fight him on it. Brad said Bitcoin is not going to solve a payments problem. And then Pomp said some say that you give up secure. This was one of the moments where I was like, man, Pomp is saying this, but it's a combination. I don't think he actually believes. He's asking a question on someone else's behalf that he saw on Twitter or something. But it's like he's throwing it out there, but he doesn't really believe the question he's even asking. He said that people were trying to say that infer that maybe XRP had given up security for speed. And Brad Garlinghouse kind of in a way almost laughed it off. And he said, no, he'd like to see some data on that. And Pomp sounded like he was reaching, but he was respectful and he did it in a nice way. Let's see. The next thing I have here, only scaled example of crypto and blockchain. Okay. Brad Garlinghouse said that XRP is the only scaled example of crypto and blockchain being used at the enterprise level. And this was almost challenged by Pomp. But again, once Brad Garlinghouse said at the enterprise level, there was really not anything to argue about, because it is. He was talking about how what Ripple is doing with XRP is really the only blockchain usage being used at the enterprise level. Then Brad went on to talk about the customers. He said that they've signed more than 100 customers this year. And then he threw out a couple of numbers and he said he wasn't sure where they were at now, but he threw out 2 numbers in the 240s and the 260s, like maybe it was in that range. And then he gave a really good example of a meeting that he had with some bankers where it involves XRP. He said they were meeting, I think he said in Sibos a few weeks ago, a meeting with a bank in Sibos. I think that's what he said. He said the bank said that it's not a question of if they are going to work with Ripple, but when, because 26 of their correspondent banks were already working with Ripple. And then another thing he mentioned is, and I'm sorry, I'm hitting this with bullet points because I didn't want to bore you with it. There were times in the interview that I got a little bored and I kind of skipped over those times. So I'm trying to hit you with the high points. He said the key metric that Ripple uses they track is a number of transactions volume, is how they measure their progress. And then he gave an example of a bank that was using RippleNet that told him that they would never use crypto for liquidity. Then they came back 18 months later and said that they were ready to talk about it. In other words, a lot of them said that early on, probably because that's what they were hearing in the news, crypto's bad and all that. Then they come back to them, probably because they're hearing about the people that are using it for liquidity. And then Brad brought up the idea that crypto is going to take down. Then this is when it came up about kind of what I've talked about a lot on this channel, which is I chose XRP because this idea that Bitcoin's going to have some revolution that's going to take down central banks is silly if you've been around for a while. Well, Brad brought this up. He brought up the idea that crypto is going to take down governments. He says governments are going to bring out their tanks before they give up their ability to control the money supply. And I thought that was a great line. And that is exactly what my point has been all along from the day I discovered XRP and what Ripple was doing, is that, yeah, I would love nothing more than if Bitcoin was going to do what these guys think it's going to do, but that's just not how the world works. Not when I'm 45 and I've been around for a while. There will always be powers that be, and they're not always going to be good guys. I agree. Okay. Pomp then asked him, can RippleNet blacklist? And he's using Iran as an example. Brad said, no, that's more the bank's function, whether they're going to do something like that. And then Pomp said the number one topic was the XRP sales on Twitter. Brad said transparency about XRP sales has opened us up to this attack. Now, this was interesting to me. Brad said that he was talking about how we're the only company that's transparent about what we do with our digital asset. Then he used the example of being on stage. I think he said with a guy named Joseph Lubin, who I don't know who that is. I think that's the name he used. And he said that this Lubin guy was challenging what Ripple was doing. And so he said that on stage, he said, well, wait a minute now. How much? Apparently Joseph Lubin is a guy who's an important person with Ethereum, because Brad Garlinghouse said he challenged him and said, well, tell us how much Ethereum you own and how much of that you sold and what you did with it. And he was making the point that Ripple is completely transparent with what they're doing with XRP, but these other people are not. And he's like, we're being penalized because we're putting it out there and trying to lead the way. And then he says, he went into the XRP escrow 55 billion XRP says, and then he said they sell XRP over the counter to institutions. He said it's mainly hedge funds speculating, and they've done it with between 20 and 30 hedge funds. They talked about programmatic sales. He said they were using coin market cap for pricing, and that was a mistake. And now they use Crypto Compare, and I actually pulled this up. This is Crypto Compare. He said they use Crypto Compare top tier, and I don't know what exactly that is, but that's what he said that they now use. And then he said Pompliano made an issue with what are you doing with money from XRP sales? And then Brad was talking about how they're investing in companies like MoneyGram, etc. Ripple does put restrictions on people who buy XRP over the counter in some cases. And Brad made the point that with Ethereum and Bitcoin, there are no restrictions, so you can have a lot more bad guys that are in the space. That's kind of what he was saying. And he kept saying, we're already so much more transparent than anybody in the space. All right, another beef jerky bite. Okay. Now, I'm getting to what I was talking about my overall of the interview. Brad Garlinghouse then said that Jeff Bezos had spoken to his class, I guess when he was in Harvard graduate school, because I think he got an MBA at Harvard. He said Jeff Bezos had come to his class. And he said that was back when Amazon was just for books. He said compared to Ripple cross-border payments, he compared Ripple cross-border payments to Amazon books. And then he said very confidently, he said, we are going to enter other verticals. In other words, now you go on Amazon and they are in everything. But when they started, they were just in books. And if you and I, as XRP investors, that should really excite you. And that's a big part of what we've talked about a lot on this channel. Okay. In fact, let me take that a step further. The Ripple sales that all these small-minded, and I do mean small-minded people on Twitter talk about, these people who get upset about Ripple selling XRP, that is the smartest, most genius thing they could be doing. You ought to be encouraging them to sell it, because when they're selling it, they are buying in and they're creating this ecosystem so that they can be the Amazon for XRP, folks. Think about it. Use your brains out there. All right. So then at the end of the interview, Brad asks Anthony Pompliano what he thinks about XRP now after the interview. This is when it really dawned on me that Anthony Pompliano truly is, and I think he's a nice guy, and I think he's a respectful guy. I think he's a guy that was raised right. I'll put it, maybe that's a good way to put it. But this guy is a Bitcoin maximalist through and through, because at the end of this, I could see through my computer that his eyes were glazed over when it came to what he had just heard. He says, after Brad Garlinghouse asks him that, says his main reservation on XRP is why not use Bitcoin? And when I heard that, I was like, this guy didn't hear anything that Brad Garlinghouse just said, because he doesn't want to hear anything Brad Garlinghouse just said. And I think that really sums up this whole game. I think that so many people see it as XRP or Bitcoin versus everything else. And I did not think that Anthony Pompliano was that entrenched, but he is now. Because Brad Garlinghouse, when he said that, I'm sure it took him back too. Because Brad's answer, when Pomp said his main reservation on XRP is why not use Bitcoin, Brad's answer is the same thing that I would say. He says, because XRP's faster and cheaper. And that idea, that concept just completely, it didn't fly over Anthony Pompliano's head, because Anthony Pompliano is a smart guy. Well, the other option, if it didn't go over his head because he's smart enough to comprehend it, means that it's a religion to him. Bitcoin is his religion, and you're not changing someone's mind on their religion. He's ignoring all facts. That's what I got out of it. That is exactly what I got out of this. And Brad Garlinghouse finished this interview by saying that he hopes that these technologies will put a dent in the universe. And he also said that he thought Anthony Pompliano was wrong in thinking that this is an either or Bitcoin or XRP. He said that he thinks that there's going to be a lot of winners, and should be. But that's the interview, folks. Now, the crypto circus. Games are won by players who focus on the playing field, not by those whose eyes are glued to the scoreboard. Warren Buffett, level playing field. I'm the digital asset investor. I'm not an investment advisor. This is for entertainment purposes only. Please subscribe and hit the like button, and tell your friends and family. Go check out Anthony Pompliano's podcast. It'll be out. I think it's out tomorrow officially. Thank you for listening.